네, 준비된
It's time. So why don't we begin? Please take your seat so that we can begin. We have only 2 sessions left. I think you want to have another session in addition to those 2 sessions left. Thank you very much for such an enthusiastic response. We have the special session by Korea Maritime Institute. For session 5, I would like to invite our moderator and speakers. Please welcome them with a big round of applause. Why don't we give them another round of applause? Thank you. I'm sorry I have asked you to give a round of applause so many times. Let me introduce our moderator and the speakers. Our moderator is Dr. Choi Sang-hee, Vice President for Research of Korea Maritime Institute. And we have 3 speakers. Dr. Choi Seo-gu, Director of KMI. And we are also joined by Senior Researcher Na-young Lee of KMI. And last but not the least, we have Researcher Jo Sang-hyun of KMI. Thank you very much. Then I'd like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Choi. Thank you. Very nice to meet you all. This session we have 3 presentations. The first presentation is about the Global Port Infrastructure Competitive Index, and second presentation is about Global Port Productivity. So we will take a look at individual ports, competitiveness, and infrastructure-based competitive level. And I do not believe we will announce the rankings of ports because that's rather sensitive. And global port productivity will focus on berth-specific productivity for 12,000 TEU or below. And the last presentation, AIS-based port throughput estimation. This presentation will be based on AIS data. Well, in the case of North Korea or island countries in the Southern Pacific, it is quite difficult for us to get the actual statistics. That is why we are going to use AIS to see the current status of those ports. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Choi for his presentation on Global Port Infrastructure Competitive Index.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Seo-gu Choi from Korea Maritime Institute, and my friends abroad used to call me Jake. It's much easier to pronounce it. Anyway, so today I'm excited to present the Port Infrastructure Sufficiency Index, or PISI. It was developed as part of a project under KMI. In collaboration with UNCTAD and Gyeongsang National University. And it also sponsored by the Korean Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. So let me first give you an overview of what I'm going to cover today. We will start with the background and motivation behind the development of the PISI followed by a detailed look into its the structure, methodology, and key results from the first pilot. So I conclude by outlining the future works plan for the upcoming phase. So the background. The Port Infrastructure Sufficient Index is a port performance indicator that focuses on the three key items: the punctuality, safety and security, and digitalization. It was initiated in 2019, and we have now entered the third phase of the project. The aim is to develop a comprehensive index that can help ports around the world assess their infrastructure performance and make informed improvements. So the development of PISI has, it can be divided into three phases. The first phase, which ran from 2018 to 2020, we focused on the conceptual design of the index and identified the applicable indicators. And in the second phase, from 2021 to 2023, we conducted the first pilot test targeting approximately 50 global ports. Now, in the third phase, from 2023 to 2025, we aim to refine the index and expand evaluation up to 100 ports worldwide. Now, let's look at the core components of the PISI. The index is structured around the three primary indicators: punctuality, safety and security, and digitalization. For punctuality, we measure factors such as the waiting time, vessel waiting time, and berthing time, and turnaround time. And safety and security are evaluated based on the equipment, facilities, human factors, and management practices. Finally, digitalization assesses both direct aspects like technology and communication infrastructure, and indirect aspects like national strategies and human capital development. For measuring punctuality, we use basically AIS data to calculate key performance metrics such as the average waiting time, turnaround time, and berthing time. The process involves extracting ship records from the AIS data and they calculate these times based on ship's activity in the port. And for safety and security, as mentioned earlier, it's evaluated through the three subcategories: equipment and facility, human factors, and management. So ports were asked to rate themselves on various factors using a 5-level scale from strongly disagree to the strongly agree. Key aspects include physical equipment like a CCTV and the sensors, and technology adoption, and the regular maintenance. And digitalization is measured using both indirect and direct indicators. The direct indicator assesses the enabling frameworks such as national and port-level digitalization strategies and IT education, while the direct indicator focuses on the hardware and the communication technology at the port. For the pilot project, we selected about 50 the major container ports globally based on throughput and geographical distribution. As you can see, we covered ports from regions including East Asia, Europe, North America, and more, ensuring to diverse sample of the ports. So from this slide, let me now walk you through some of key results from first pilot. In terms of punctuality, East Asia had an average turnaround time of 0.78. minutes per TEU, while North America had a longer average waiting time of 22.9 hours per vessel. These differences actually highlight the regional variation in the port performance, which can provide a value of insights for benchmarking and the improvement. And for the hub ports, the average turnaround time is 0.77 hours per vessel, average berthing time is 0.52 hours per vessel, and the average waiting time is 10.7 hours per vessel. And for greater than the vessels, for greater than 8,000 TEU, ATT is 46.6 hours per vessel, and APT is 39.5 hours per vessel, and AWT is 7.2 hours per vessel. And the survey on the safety and security and digitalization was completed by 26 ports, unfortunately. The slide 14 to 16 shows you the distribution of the respondents. So the 42.3% of the respondents were ports in Asia, and over half of these respondent ports were port authorities. And a total of 11.5% respondent ports are linked to hub ports. The interesting fact is that the highest average scores were found in equipment and facility maintenance, with an average score of 4.46 out of 5. And however, the digitalization scored slightly lower, with the average score of 3.7, indicating there are still plenty of rooms for improvement in areas like IT education and national strategy development. So this is summary, and for the future works. As we move forward, we plan to refine the functionality measurement algorithms, specifically by adjusting how we calculate the waiting time. In addition, we will enhance the objectivity of the questionnaire used for the evaluating safety and security and digitalization. And the phase 3, we will expand the evaluation to 100 global container ports, which will allow for more comprehensive analysis of the PISI. So to conclude, I'd like to say the Port Infrastructure Sufficiency Index provides a holistic framework for evaluating the performance of ports worldwide, and focusing on 3 key components: punctuality, safety and security, and the digitalization. As we continue with phase 3 of the project, we hope to further refine the index and continue to development of smarter, safer, and more efficient global ports. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
예,
Thank you very much. The second presentation is about global port productivity. The presentation will be delivered by Senior Researcher Na-young Lee of KMI. Distinguished guests, good morning. I'm Na-young Lee from KMI. I'll be presenting on global port productivity trends. In this presentation, I will first discuss the background and necessity of port productivity data and statistics, followed by a detailed breakdown of productivity results by region, country, and individual ports. Then I will conclude with the outlook for the remainder of the year 2024. First, background. Ports are critical infrastructure that require substantial capital investment and significantly impact national economies. Inefficient port operations can lead to a waste of social resources. Importantly, as longer port calls increase costs for shipping companies, port efficiency has become a crucial factor in their selection of ports. In an increasingly competitive environment, there is a growing need for immediate and continuous efficiency indicators to secure port competitiveness. At KMI, we monitor domestic port competitiveness by aggregating berth productivity indicators among various factors evaluating port competitiveness and efficiency. Ever-increasing size of container vessels has made it especially important to maintain competitiveness for these vessels. In 2007, ships over 12,000 TEU accounted for just 0.4% of global container capacity. By August 2024, this figure has grown to 35.6%. And the number of ships below 12,000 TEU has grown only about 1% per annum. But over the same period, the number of ships over 12,000 TEUs has grown over 10%. Therefore, today's presentation will focus on berth productivity trends for larger vessels over 12,000 TEUs across the different regions, countries, and ports. Let me turn to methodology. We calculate berth productivity using sample data from approximately 600 ports worldwide. This is a sample data. So to reduce and avoid bias as much as possible, we apply minimal pre-processing conditions. We apply pre-processing conditions and resulting in productivity figures for about 900 terminals across 300 ports. As illustrated, berth productivity represents the number of containers loaded and unloaded during a berthing time. So the data and methodology have produced results by regions, by countries, and by ports. In the first half of 2024, the global average berth productivity for ships over 12,000 TEU was 102.2. South Asia and Southeast Asia regions showed the highest productivity, followed by Northeast Asia. Berth productivity, which had declined due to COVID-19 in 2020 and the logistics crisis in 2021, showed signs of recovery in 2023. However, recent challenges such as the Red Sea crisis and front-loading in anticipation of increased U.S. demand and the race to secure sufficient inventories have led to port congestion and decreased berth productivity in the first half of 2024. And this is the phenomena across the board. Let me turn to country-specific results. So this is for top 20 countries. Malaysia has consistently maintained the top position since 2019 among the top 20 ports in berth productivity. Korea ranked 11th. The top 5 countries, Malaysia, Morocco, China, Vietnam, and the Netherlands, have fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels in the first half of 2024, while other countries are showing slower pace of recovery. Turning to individual ports, as of the first half of 2024, Egypt's port side topped the list. And Malaysia's Tanjung Palapas, which had held the top spot since 2019, dropped to third place. Port side's significant productivity increase is attributed to a major expansion project that began in late 2022, which, despite not greatly increasing cargo volume, substantially reduced container handling times through investment in container yards and crane equipment. Busan Port rose 2 positions from the 2023 level to 25th. Notable improvements were seen in Morocco's Tangier Med, Vietnam's Khai Map, and Malaysia's Port Klang. In terms of their volume as well as their ranking, they have improved significantly. This trend indicates growing productivity in Southeast Asian and Middle Eastern ports. I think this is attributable to the increased capacity and resulting in the reduced handling time. Additionally, we examined the average berth productivity of the top 20 ports by container volume. Among those top 20 ports, the average for the first half of 2024 was 113.2, with Busan Port ranking 14th. To summarize and look ahead to the second half of 2024, berth productivity for larger container ships showed recovery in 2023, particularly in Asia, following the pandemic. However, recent challenges such as the Red Sea crisis and increased front-loading for inventory buildup have led to port congestion and decreased productivity. Ongoing global supply chain uncertainties and challenges, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict and potential strikes at U.S. East Coast ports, and expanding protectionism, suggest that a full recovery in berth productivity may be challenging in the latter half of 2024. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Last but not the least, I'd like to turn to researcher Jo Sung-yeon of KMI for his presentation on AIS-based port throughput estimation.
Good morning, everyone. Today, I will be presenting on the topic estimating key statistics for port development, especially for ports with limited statistical data using AIS data. I am Sung-yeon Cho, a researcher from KMI, joined by my colleagues Hyun-jo and Bo-kyung Kim, who have also contributed to this study. So in this presentation, I will first explain the background and motivation of this study. Then, for the remaining sections, I'll briefly outline the methodology for establishing key statistics and present the findings. Port statistics are critical for decision-making across all stages of port development, from feasibility and benefit analysis during the development phase to improving efficiency and productivity in the operational phase. Key indicators include cargo volume, ship arrivals, and berthing times, which are essential for understanding port productivity and service quality. However, obtaining reliable port statistics is a challenge, especially in countries with limited transparency like North Korea. For example, there have been no official North Korean port trade volumes since 1984, and most studies rely on indirect data sources. Similarly, Pacific Island countries often lack systemized data on port activities, making it difficult to gather accurate statistics. Meanwhile, AIS data provides a powerful solution for addressing the lack of port statistics. AIS, or Automated Identification System, is a satellite-based system that tracks real-time information on ships, including their positions, speed, and draft. Since it's mandatory for most international cargo ships, AIS data can offer a reliable insight into port activity, even where traditional statistics are unavailable. Recently, many researchers have been using AIS data to estimate port statistics, including key factors like trade volume, berthing times, and environmental impact. This growing trend demonstrates the power of AIS data in providing valuable insights. And our research is motivated by the need to apply these AIS data methodologies to ports with limited statistical data. Thus, we aim to establish the following statistics for ports with limited data using AIS data. Specifically, we focus on establishing statistics on ship specifications and port calls, and estimating berthing and waiting times for ships, and estimating port cargo throughput. So in this presentation, I will explain each methodology for establishing these statistics and present the results of the 2022 pilot study conducted for the port of Suva in Fiji, the port of Apia in Samoa, and the port of Nampo in North Korea. So in this section, we used AIS data to identify the ship specifications and port calls. The picture below indicates the comparison between satellite image and AIS data. The red dots are the ship records, and you can find the clusters near berths, and you can also find the rotational shapes, which refers to the waiting area of ships before berthing. So at Apia Port, for instance, we could identify 14 container ships, 4 general cargo ships, and 4 general cargo ships with ro-ro facility. The average TEU of the container ships were 1,446, and 275 ship calls were recorded in 2022, with container ships making an average of 4.6 calls. At Nampo Port, we recorded 184 ship calls in 2022, including non-identifiable ships. For the identifiable cargo ships, the general cargo ships dominated the port activity. These statistics offer insights into port activity, even for ports with limited traditional data. And secondly, we calculated the berthing and waiting times using AIS data. Let's see the picture of the movement route of the container ship at Apia Port, derived by AIS data. The ship came from out of the port in the north part of this picture, and the ship came from the north direction and waited at anchorage for a while. And it soon continues moving to the designated berths and be moored at it. The time taken in the anchorage area is regarded as the waiting time, and the time moored at the berth is considered as berthing time. Here is a breakdown of the average berthing time and waiting times by ship type at the port of Suva in 2022. It turns out that the container ships in Suva port normally stays at King's Wharf for 44.6 hours and their average waiting time is 12.7 hours. We also derived which and how the specific berths are used, as well as the average waiting time. For example, King's Wharf and Walloop Bay are mainly used by cargo ships such as bulk carriers, container ships, and general cargo ships. However, Princess Wharf is used by ships which are all related to fishing industry, such as fishing vessels, fishery research vessels, and refrigerated cargo ships. On the other hand, Muai Walu, which is the old port, is frequently used by small landing craft and passenger ships. For the port of Nampo, there are three kinds of berths, which is liquid cargo berths, bulk cargo berths, and container berths. The derived berthing time were 1.3 hours for liquid cargo berths, and 136.2 hours for bulk cargo berths, and 20.5 hours for container berths. The very rare entrance and too short berthing time of liquid cargo berths is, of course, not trustworthy. Actually, we found an article that the satellite image actually shows that the number of gas storage facility in Nampo Port showing increasing pattern. Therefore, we can assume that the majority of the tankers turn off the AIS equipment before entering the port of Nampo. In the final section, we estimated cargo throughput. We adopted 5 models based on vessel characteristics, including deadweight ton, which is the maximum cargo capacity of a vessel, draft, the depth of the vessel's keel below the waterline, and block coefficient, the ratio of the underwater volume. And we applied them to the available AIS data. Moreover, we newly developed the crane productivity-based model. Bulk carriers typically load a single type of cargo at the point of origin and unload nearly 100% at the destination. In contrast, container ships usually operate on routes that include multiple ports, unloading only a portion of the loaded cargo and possibly loading additional cargo at the same time. Therefore, analyzing handling volume based on service time may be advantageous for estimating port cargo throughput, especially in container cargo. Before demonstrating the estimation results, I want to tackle an issue that though we developed the models, there are not enough data for verification yet. We only could compare our results with international maritime trade volume of each country. Fortunately, the port of Apia explains more than 95% of Samoa's international maritime trade volume, so we used it as proxy of Apia's port throughput. The estimated result for the port of Apia was very intriguing. For container ships, we used the CWI model, which is developed by IMF, which showed 0.98 correlation with container throughput. And for general cargo, we applied the AIS Ship 2 model, which is developed by KMI, showing a correlation of 0.99. So these results demonstrate the effectiveness and potential of using AIS data to estimate port cargo activity. So in conclusion, our research shows that AIS data can be used to estimate key port statistics even for ports with limited traditional data. Moving forward, we aim to expand the scope of this research both temporally and spatially by validating our models with data from similar ports. So thank you for your attention. I would now like to open the floor for any questions and discussions you may have. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 자리로
Thank you very much. Please go back to your seat. So we had 3 presentations. The first is about global port infrastructure competitiveness or sufficiency index for 47 ports. schedule reliability, but safety and security, as well as digitalization were measured. As for schedule reliability, depending on the size of the vessels and the size of the ports, but we could see the gap and differences. And the second and the third measures was safety and security, as well as the digitalization. A questionnaire and a survey were conducted. And for the second presentation, global port productivity on 300 ports worldwide, well, it was for a berth which can accommodate vessels of 12,000 TEUs or bigger. So KMI conducts this survey and study on an annual basis. So per year, we can see port-specific trends. Third presentation about the AIS-based port throughput estimation, the berthing time, time of arrival, an AIS data-based throughput estimation model was developed, and this model was applied to countries with not structured or not sufficient data. That's where we can see the significance of the study. For these three presentations, I'd like to open the floor for questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and please tell us your name as well as your association.
Good morning. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Iqbal from Batam, from Indonesia. My first question is to Mr. Choi regarding with the PC, about the global port infrastructure index. Can you mention the ranks amongst the port in the world? And then, especially in Indonesia, how is the ranks of the port in Indonesia on the PC index? And then question number 2 to Ms. Lee, related with the productivity. What is the main factor and main reason of Busan ports can increase the ranks from previous ranks increase to the 2 spot? And why still Busan port cannot achieve in the top 10 rank? Thank you.
먼저
So thank you very much for the question. As for the Port Infrastructure Sufficiency Index, PISI, right now it's under pilot test. And so we are working with the UNCTAD to conduct the first pilot test for this index. But because it's in a pilot scale, and therefore I think that we still have a lot of rooms for improvement and refinement. And that's why when we drafted the final report, we decided not to disclose the rankings by port or by nations. So I would like to ask for understanding. But I think that the whole report that's actually available in the UNCTAD website. So you can get the download for the details of this report. And this year we are conducting the second pilot test, and if it's complete successfully, then I believe that we'll be able to provide you with more rich insights, especially so that the policymakers and also the people in the port authorities can have better insight on the sufficiency.
As for berth productivity index, berth productivity is determined based on various factors. For example, the contract between the carrier and operator and the allocation of a berth, human resources and equipment availability, and so on. As I mentioned in my presentation, the reason why we produce this indicator is to see the Korean port competitiveness. And in that process, we had to secure data on a consistent basis of ports around the world. So we got the sample data of a container vessel, the port entry of SNA data. The data is rather simple, so that is why there is such a difficulty for us to secure detailed data. So there are certain limitations in identifying various factors. But as for the reasons why the rankings has gone up or has gone down, are based on our interviews with the experts. As for Busan Port, recently in 2022, since there are some terminals which opened in 2022, and it took some time for those terminals to be on track. So the performance of those terminals were relatively low for the initial days, and this year it went up 2 notches. Because last year in a certain terminal, their plan for equipment, some of the terminals upgraded their operating plant to accommodate and handle more cargoes. They put in more equipment and resources. If cargo volume of Busan Port has gone up by 10%, the handling time has not gone up as much as 10%. That is why Busan Port has gone up by 2 notches. The one last point I'd like to highlight is, we will continue to work to make this as objective as possible, but productivity index, although this is one of the important figures for container ports, but this is not the figure you have to refer to. So rather than looking at the numbers or looking at the rankings, I'd like to ask you to pay more attention to the trends for your own port, how things are going over time. That's what I'd like to ask you to focus more on. Thank you.
네, 다음 질문 받겠습니다.
So we'll take some more questions. So the professor there is waiting. So why don't you give him the microphone first?
Zorthanos Pallis from the University of Piraeus in Greece. Actually, I have a question for the first 2 presentations. First of all, about the index, the first index. You are based on the idea that you are calculating waiting times, but waiting times are not always under the control of the ports. We have feeder vessels that wait outside a port just because the mother vessel has to come first, and then to pick then the cargoes for feeding other ports. So my question, in short, is how do you calculate that, or how do we treat ports that cannot control these variables, the different types of vessels? We cannot treat all vessels as similar, and the waiting times as similar. And then for the second presentation, also about the performance, I was puzzled a bit because World Bank is also producing a global port performance. I don't know if you are aware, and if you can tell us the difference a bit, because there also the productivity at berth is based on the size of vessels. When we have a 10,000 TEUs vessel, then the productivity is different when we have a smaller vessel. So again, we have seen the World Bank treating performance of container terminals based on the size of vessels that they handle. Would be a possible way to identify different categories of vessels and different types of productivity? Otherwise, we cannot treat all ports equally? These are my questions. Thank you.
예, 좀 어려운 질문.
So thank you for that question. I think it's a bit difficult, but so as for calculating the waiting time, so there are several data available, and one of them is AIS data. So we try to utilize the AIS data as much as possible in order to measure the waiting time objectively. As you mentioned, depending on the types of the vessels and also the way that the cargoes are unloaded, yes, I believe that there could be some dispute over the results of the waiting time calculations. So we do understand that. And so for that part, we are in the process of still refining and further improving the index. So this year, I think through the second pilot test, we'll be able to make further refinement and to have a more objective waiting time calculation. And thankfully, Mr. Cho, the third presenter, he actually talked about the way that we can have a more objective waiting time calculation. And we're actually developing some methodology. And that methodology is going to be applied for the second pilot test that we conduct this year so that we can have a better way for measuring waiting time. I think in the question, so for the, again, the waiting time is something that the port authority cannot control. So I think the question is about how do you reflect that in estimating the ranks for different ports and countries. So one thing that I would like to mention is that if the port is highly productive, where the throughput time is fast, then I think that these could be the conditions where port authorities can reduce the waiting time. And this actually means that that particular port authority is competitive, has a competitiveness or sufficiency infrastructure. Yes, so in deciding on the major components for the PISI, as you mentioned, we reflected these factors. So utilizing AIS data from port perspective, we try to develop a way where the port authority can evaluate their performance and also compare their performance as a status with the other port authorities. That's why we developed this PISI. So I think that's what the purpose of this index lies.
Well, the index of World Bank, IHS market, CPPI index, is that you are referring to? I'm not sure. I am aware of the index, the World Bank and IHS markets joint index. And we are using, well, S&P data, market data. Within the CPPI index, productivity is only one of the factors. And other than productivity, World Bank incorporates other factors to present a comprehensive evaluation result. I don't quite recall, but as for Port of Busan, in the CPPI index ranking and my productivity index ranking are more or less the same. I hope that answers your question. Next question.
Hi. So I work a lot with maritime data, and one of the biggest problems is data integrity from the source. And I see problems with each of the three analysis that has been done. And this is not a criticism of your work, but really I think the effort should be to try and refine a lot of these studies. So for the first one, for example, ship waiting time, I track port congestion very closely, but the problem is waiting time does not start when the ship arrives at the anchorage. And a lot of times the ships are waiting outside, and in some cases, very far outside. For example, during the LA port congestion, the ships were waiting 50 miles away from LA. And so how do you account for those ships, and how is that analyzed in your actual waiting times? On the second one, on vessel moves, the problem with the analysis that we've done, and I've tried to do the same thing, is it's not easy to get actual vessel move counts. And even the S&P or the IHS sources is incomplete because a lot of ports are not giving full numbers, and it depends on which source these port moves are coming from. And that makes the rankings highly questionable. If you compare, say, ports in Malaysia against ports in Singapore, and you can see the difference in the performance of those two ports. That does not tie with actual performance of the ports compared to the rankings. And again, I think the problem is with the data source. And with the third analysis, oftentimes what we see, not just in small ports, but in ports in sanctioned countries, and that includes North Korea, but right now also includes Iran and Russia. A lot of these ships that enter ports in the sanctioned countries do not turn on their AIS. And so we are missing a big part of those data. So again, I'm just pointing out all of this. The analysis, a lot of these analyses are useful, but what I'm afraid of is that the users of these analyses might miss out some of the flaws of these research.
예, 그 코멘트.
Thank you for that comment. So for the PISI index, in calculating and measuring the waiting time, so when we did the first pilot test, we actually had a lot of views and perspectives on how to develop the methodology. And in fact, because it was in the initial phase, so we chose to use the most simple method. So out of the turnaround time, we deduct the berthing time to calculate the waiting time. That was the method that we took. But then we received a lot of feedbacks regarding the methodology. So starting from this year, in measuring the waiting time, we developed a separate algorithm for calculation. So I actually mentioned this earlier, that in estimating the waiting time, so first we have to have the anchorage information for the arrival of the vessels. And when it comes to Korea, we can actually have a exact altitude and longitude data for the anchorage, and therefore we can effectively calculate the waiting time for vessels in a very accurate way. However, in other ports, I believe that these information are often inaccurate. And so latitude and longitude. So we use the satellite information in order to find out which anchorages the vessels are anchored, and then we somehow artificially select the scope or the areas in order to calculate the waiting time or the extent of the areas. And also one thing that I also agree is that, so we have the data handling. That's our job. And as you know, there is no such thing as perfect data. So this is a sort of the golden rule for the data processing work. But we try to extract as much useful information from the data as possible. So I think that's the role of the researchers. But we really appreciate your feedback. It really helps us. So thank you for your feedback, and we try to reflect that as much as possible. Thank you very much.
As for the utilization of AIS data, I also have studied the congestion as well as the waiting time. Outside the official anchorage, vessels would wait for LALB. I think that's the final policy decision. But there are some ports which do not have any such policy in order to avoid the application of the port dues if there is any available anchorage. For example, in case of Port of Busan, well, the vessels would wait there. So even if without using the anchorage, we use the term drifting. So outside the ports, there are many vessels wait outside this port area. So although we have not been able to apply and take into consideration the slow steaming, we are working on taking into account the vessels waiting outside the port areas. So we are currently developing algorithms to capture that part as well, including North Korea. There are sanctioned countries, and as you mentioned, due to the war between Russia and Ukraine, in the off coast of Africa, there was bunkering, ship-to-ship bunkering, captured only in satellite image, but not in AIS. Well, there was a new press coverage as to that. But the reason why we apply AIS data for North Korea, that's because there is no available quantifiable data whatsoever since 1984. So even the limited sample would help to a certain extent to see what kind of vessel would come in and the average volume or the ship supply as well as the equipment. And if there is any deterioration, how much that would be. So that was kind of a pilot study for us to get this overall high-level picture. The traffic volume would not be fully captured in this statistics and analysis, and we'll make sure that this will be fully disclosed to the public. Thank you.
예.
안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. I am from City Government of Busan. Well, thank you very much for such insightful presentations. Global Infrastructure Sufficiency Index was released today. That is why I think we can see such an enthusiasm from the audience. I'd like to ask several questions.
So regarding the formula to calculate the waiting time, so I think that is it based on the whole number of the vessels that arrive, or are you particularly focusing on certain terminal? And so, as you know, our ports in Korea, I think by linking with the port miss or TOS system, we can actually calculate the waiting time or the waiting rate. However, what you produce is the ranks among different countries. So I wonder, how did you calculate the waiting time in other countries? Because if you utilize the AIS data, then I believe that the bunkering and also the exchange of the crews, because of these issues, some vessels do wait. So I think this should also be reflected as a part of the waiting time. So we can actually have a system that kind of activities is declared through the port miss system, so we can reflect that. And also some authority, they produce the similar index, and we utilize that for policy making. So do you also have a plan to regularly update and announce the index, and how do you secure the reliability of the index if you do have the plan for the regular reporting? Right, so as you mentioned, in estimating the waiting time, there are various variables that we have to be aware and cautious about. As you mentioned, so whether it's based on the port or based on the terminals. Yeah, so this is something that we have to decide in our first pilot test. So in Korea, we can actually do the calculation for a certain port or a terminal, but we have to develop a common indicator which can be applicable to ports throughout the world. So we actually face some limitation and problems. So our initial goal is to develop the index based on port. In other words, the waiting time by port. That's our goal right now. And I think it's not really easy to be as granular as at the terminal level. And also, actually, Dr. Cho is in charge of this, so maybe he's more knowledgeable. So I'll hand over the microphone to Dr. Cho. So we are actually refining and developing the formula continuously. But as for the container ships, so we first extract data for the container terminal. So vessels that arrive in the container port, these vessels, we assume that they basically finish the unloading works. And we estimated the waiting time accordingly. So we don't really estimate all the staying time for all the vessels in the port. Rather, we focused on the vessels that are very likely to have the unloading works. And we only include these vessels for the calculation of the waiting time. But that methodology has not been fixed yet. It's still under discussion, so your feedback will be highly appreciated. So did it answer your question? And regarding the second question, so you talked about the reliability and also the continuity of the PISI. So you asked about that. So at the end of this year, we are going to conduct the second pilot test for the PISI. And compared to the initial pilot test, we actually include the much more numbers of the port for the pilot test. And also we use a quantifiable data. So still we have a lot of rooms for improvement for methodology, but I believe because we use the quantifiable data, so we can secure a certain level of the reliability for punctuality. But for the security and the digitalization, we have to rely on survey results which cannot be quantified. So there are some limitations to attain a significant level of the reliability. But this year we plan to upgrade our questionnaire to have a more reliable feedback and also reliable assessment, especially we make sure that the respondents can assess their port situations in an objective manner. So we developed a guideline for filling out the surveys. This is one of our efforts to secure a neutral and objective results. And also our ultimate goal is to regularly announce the results of the ranking, but this is something that we actually have to work hard. So thank you very much. I think we're having a very heated discussion and we are almost reaching a time limit. But maybe can we take one last burning question? Yes, so we do have a person who kept his hand raised. So
already have one. Thanks for the very interesting presentations. I'm very happy to discuss AIS data because we do a lot of those analyses as well and launching a liner service delay monitor. So I know a little bit about the problem with the data. I have one comment and one question. First, because that already raised, I would say the productivity of ports, if we measure it in TU, that's normally controlled by the terminals and not necessarily by the port authorities, which are rather more for the traffic and the optimization, at least within Europe, that's that case. But I have also one specific case for the ranking. And I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure if it's due to the translation services. It was every time waiting times in my ear, which for me would normally be the waiting time outside of the port. I think very interesting interesting thing that you're also using for all your data is the berthing time, so the amount that I'm located at the berth. And with regards to that, I have the question specifically, in Europe we have a couple of tidal ports. And at the end of the day, in those ports, you don't gain anything by making it more productive by 1 hour or something like that, because you basically calculate in 12.5 hours, because that's the tidal window that is given by the moon. Is that somehow reflected in your analysis, or do you consider some kind of alternative measurements for productivity of those ports? Because, as mentioned, they have other restrictions than those with non-tidal ports.
As for the tidal ports, we didn't capture that aspect. As I mentioned in my answer to the first question, in order to see the competitiveness of the container ports throughout the world, we wanted to set the equal footing. That is why we try to quantify as much as possible. So we use the berthing time and the number of containers loaded and unloaded, the length of quay, the number of equipment put in, or tidal or non-tidal ports. Well, these factors would be included and incorporated down the road, but not now. So those aspects will also be captured down the road. Thank you. The waiting time includes the boarding time. Would you please mention? The boarding time, which presentation are you referring to? I'm not sure, but anyway, the boarding time is not included in the waiting time that is categorized as a service time. But for that level of congestion and the impact are calculated. If there is such a congestion in the yard, but the trend is observed, but the boarding time is not included as waiting time, but service time is also important, and that's an important factor we consider. Thank you. Thank you very much for great presentations, for enthusiastic and passionate questions. I would like to thank our presenters as well as the audience for such an active participation. Thank you.
네, 좋은 발표 너무.
So thank you very much for the heated discussion, and you may return to your seat. I think that maybe next year we may have to have a BIPC for the whole week, because we do have a lot of comments and questions to deal with. But once again, thank you very much for your active participation. We'll now have a 10-minute coffee break. So now it's the 11:28. So after the 10-minute break, we'll resume the session. Coffee and refreshments are available outside the lobby, so in the lobby. So we will see you soon.
Resume and finish the conference. We have the last session left for the BIPC. So I'll see you soon. Thank you.